Hello everyone, my name is Paul and welcome back to the new news. I hope that everyone's having a fantastic day. I hope that you, your family, and your friends are safe, and if not, I do hope that you find that safety and security in the very near future. Obviously, there's a ton of stuff that's happening around the world, whether you're talking about the war in Ukraine or you're talking about what's going on there in Africa or in the Middle East or in general with the news. There's always something happening. Usually speaking, the stuff that makes the news is not generally good things. It's usually some, unfortunately, rather depressing things, though we do have some uplifting news tonight, of course. But in general, it's pretty bad stuff, and this kind of brings about the whole reason for doing this channel and the whole reason for having started this project. Here at the New News, we have two major objectives. Our first major objective is to give you and provide you information and general idea of what's happening in the world around you. Make you aware of what's happening, in other parts of the globe that you may not be so familiar with. But also our second major goal, and really the one that we want to, the whole purpose in making sure you're informed, is to be able to be the news that gives back. And the way that we're able to do that is through you guys. If you go and you check out the video description below or on our website, you're going to find a ton of different organizations that are listed there. We can't put a fundraiser onto our live streams yet. Once we are able to do so, we will on all of them. But the whole point of this channel is to be the news that gives back. And so checking out the video description, you're going to see a ton of different organizations. All those organizations, 70% or more of the donations that they receive go directly to their programs, meaning they go directly to helping people, with 30% or less going to things like salaries and administration's costs. So please be sure to check those out. They cover a multitude of things, not just the war in Ukraine, but also humanitarian efforts, reconstruction. There's stuff for Africa. There's stuff that covers international space in general. There's stuff that covers, disaster relief and what have you, and we're constantly looking for more. So if you have more, please feel free to send them to us. Please feel free to get in contact with a staff member either on our Discord or our website through our official emails. Those are all listed in the description below as well, and you can be part of that. You can send those to us, and we would love to go through and start vetting them to make sure that they fit our criteria and getting them added to these streams. We want to fill up all 5,000 characters of the description with nothing but links. And so with that, obviously a lot of stuff going on. We're getting into the news here. A lot of it has to do with conflicts, and please feel free to ask questions if you're joining live with us tonight, as I encourage you always to do so. Guarantee if you have the question, someone else more than likely certainly does that will end up watching this, and I will do my best to answer those live here on the stream to the very best of my ability. Now, to give you a little bit of a background on myself, I started the Marine Corps between 2016 and 2020. I was an 0352 anti-tank missileman and a corporal with 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines. I did 2 tours to the Middle East. My first tour between October of 2017 and March of 2018. I went to Syria, where I spent roughly 4.5 months, with about a month and a half in Kuwait during transit. There, as part of Operation Inherent Resolve, and I was attached to Special Operations Forces and coalition partners in the northeastern part of the country of Syria. They're fighting the Islamic State and also providing stabilization efforts and providing security for the SDF partners and obviously things that were happening there at the time, not all of which I think is probably allowed to be shared. But I did do a lot of operations there, spent a lot of time there. Got to know a lot of great people while I was there, and got to obviously do my job while I was there. My second tour to the Middle East was between October of 2019 and March of 2020. This time I returned to Kuwait, where I spent the majority of my time as the Javelin team leader for the Crisis Response Company out of Kuwait. On New Year's of 2020, during the Baghdad Embassy Complex attack, I was one of the 100 Marines that did respond to that crisis, and I oversaw all anti-armor operations over the entire Baghdad Embassy Complex, as well as providing security there to the complex in general, and assisting in breaking up those riots and protecting the security of the site. After that, I went to Saudi Arabia, where I trained Saudi Arabian Marines that were preparing to deploy to Yemen as part of that Saudi coalition before returning back to the U.S. And in between those two deployments, I also ran a company armory as the non-commissioned officer in charge of the NCOIC of my company armory for weapons company, meaning I have a lot of experience doing logistics and maintenance, and I also do logistics and maintenance, or I also do logistics in my now civilian career as well. So I am a subject matter expert in anti-armor warfare and armored doctrine, as well as a fully cross-trained machiner, a fully cross-trained rifleman, a partially cross-trained radio operator, and a CLS, or Combat Lifesaver Certified Marine, meaning I've received additional medical training on top of what most Marines will receive in their careers, and I also do have battlefield experience in providing aid to casualties. So I do have that real-world experience with that. And on top of that, I also can talk at the tactical small unit leadership level on decision making and maneuvers and things like that. But once you get to that strategic level, it's no longer within my bounds of expertise. I was never formally trained for those big scale things, though I do try to make inferences from what I know. And I also will try to answer questions in other subjects as well. I have a personal interest in history, personal interest in geopolitics, things like that. And I will do my best to try and answer any of your questions on those. But at the end of the day, I'm not an expert. And even if I'm a subject matter expert or not, it really doesn't matter, because I implore you as the viewer to please do your own research, as there is no substitute for it anywhere. You cannot go to any source and try and get all the facts from them. You cannot ask questions and get all the facts from anybody. You need to go and do your own research. It is imperative. So please feel free, if you want a starting point. These maps are available on our website. I post them before every single stream, so you can follow along, or you can go back after the fact and check through all of these different sources. A lot of these have associated articles and official publications that go with them that I may or may not be showing during the stream for you guys to go and check out. So feel free to please go and check out all of the maps. We have them archived clear up until I believe very early in April, when we start archiving our maps and actually have the website put together. So with that, we immediately get to dive right there into the news after, of course, an always long intro. And we start off here in the country of Ukraine, which is the hot topic of the night, as it has been since we started the channel. Ukraine was invaded on the 24th of February of last year, so we're quickly coming up to a year. We had just passed 11 months as of yesterday. And so we are now looking at getting into, that last bit of a year mark. A very long year for Ukraine, especially. And in Kyiv, we have a couple of different updates. Our first one is, of course, a very somber update. It's the child casualty update, something that we get almost every single stream that we do. And this comes from the Prosecutor General's Office of Ukraine, and they state, quote, "Since the beginning of Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine, 459 Ukrainian children have died, 914 children have been injured. Most victims among children are from the Donetsk region." And that number does continue to steadily climb as we continue seeing, as the kinetic activity there on the front lines does continue, as the bombardments continue, the strikes continue throughout Ukraine, and it has caused an immense amount of casualties in the civilian side of things. And these are just the confirmed casualties. Those numbers are likely very significantly higher, as the United Nations points out, and we will probably not know the full extent of this for many years, if not decades, after all of the evidence and all of the graves and everything have been combed through during the investigation. The other thing coming out of Kyiv is that Baykar has given Ukraine 2 more TB2 Bayraktar drones free of charge. This was reported by the General Staff of Ukraine. The Baykar, who produces the TB2 Bayraktar drone, which was used very heavily at the very beginning of the war, some of the very first aid that Ukraine got were these drone systems. They operated very effectively and completely annihilating Russian convoys and causing immense amount of casualties and destruction amongst their forces. We're seeing 2 more of those. These come from the Turkish defense company Baykar, despite some of those issues with Turkey at this point in time and other aspects of the alliances. We can see those here being reported by the General Staff of Ukraine. That allows us to move over here and onto the front lines. We immediately get to roll into the Donbass. This is the meat and potatoes of the war. This is where the fighting is ongoing. And the first thing we actually jump to is up here. This is in Seversk. Seversk has been under a constant bombardment. It is actually one of the supporting objectives, one of the supporting maneuvers for the Russian forces at one point was pushing towards Seversk before their flanks were rolled back. Seversk has been under sustained bombardment basically for the past 6 or so months. And what we can see here is the UN is actually delivering aid here to Seversk. One of the things that we don't really see very often. Big organizations like the United Nations, the World Health Organization, which kind of falls into that realm, as well as the Red Cross, generally speaking, are going to operate in areas much more rear of the line. So you're going to not see them up close and personal. You're not really going to see them crossing front lines really at all. The Russians won't let them cross the front line, as the UN has already very clearly stated multiple times, as they have never been in areas that are under occupation. They do not go into these forward areas just because they see it as too dangerous for their personnel and their shipments. And that comes after years of attempting to do it in other locations, such as in Yugoslavia, and having their convoys attacked and those trying to provide aid being massacred, unfortunately. The UN here doing the same thing. They're going to the front lines, and we have seen them in and around the area of Soledar and up here in Seversk, and where they actually brought in 3 trucks worth of supplies to provide life-saving aid to over 1,700 people coming from the Office of Coordination and Humanitarian Affairs. This is Denise Brown, who is in charge of the humanitarian affairs here in Ukraine for the United Nations.
Today, the humanitarian community delivered directly humanitarian supplies to Seversk. It's the first time we're able to come here. We've only been able to deliver close by in the past because of the intense fighting. We're about 20 kilometers from Solidar. There are more than 1,000 people left in this town and children. We've brought necessary supplies to repair homes, medicines because the doctor remained behind, food and shelter kits. More has to be done here, but in order for that to happen, we need to be able to have regular access to these locations.
More, of course, coming from the World Health Organization. This was a joint mission. This is all between U.S. aid. It had Germany and Ukraine. It had the World Health Organization. It also had, of course, the UN, who all jumped into here. So this is a joint project for them, was to bring equipment and to bring supplies here. A lot of people are already jumping in. I see leopards, little meme leopards that are posted in the chat from Charlton Brook. Bookham 40, by my count, 3 battalions of tanks, 6 battalions of infantry fighting vehicles supporting artillery, recon, and support are being set this year. What to do with them? Question mark. We'll get into that. There is a lot of aid coming in. There's a lot of things that have been sent to Ukraine today, as I'm sure everyone is already aware of at this point in the night, but quite a bit happening, and it's quite a bit of stuff that it does need to be discussed. What is this going to mean? What does this mean? Was it for? And that kind of stuff. Lock down the land bridge? Question mark. Surprise attack from Mongolia? Question mark. Yeah. The bloody battles for containment here around Soledar do continue. So at this point, the Ukrainian forces have stated that there's no real way to take Soledar back at this point. They simply don't have the forces, and it's not really something they can do without taking unacceptable levels of casualties. And as a result, Ukrainian troops have taken up defensive positions on the bridges overlooking Soledar, which gives them perfect fields of fire, and they are now using that to repel infantry assaults, directing artillery barrages on the city and troops within it, and containing the Russians within the city of Soledar, instead of trying to hold down that anchor point. This allows the Ukrainian troops to still defend on that northern sector to an extent, but still it is a very tense situation, and it really is kind of flaunting that whole resolve that Ukrainian forces have despite their setbacks, which honestly I think a lot of people are discrediting the Ukrainians within and around Soledar, especially in the expert community, who also said that they should have never lasted 72 hours, let alone at this point almost a year into the war. So once again, I think the expert community is kind of failing on that front. And we do have a quote regarding what's happening in Soledar finally. Quote, the armed forces of Ukraine withdrew from Soledar in the Donetsk region to pre-prepared defensive lines. The tactical retreat was made to preserve the lives of the Ukrainian soldiers. And that's coming from Sergei Teravati, who is the spokesman for the Eastern Group of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. So this is actually from a Russian intelligence drone. This is the Ukrainian defensive line there in Soledar. This is on one of the ridges. So and this is how you're supposed to build trench lines, by the way. So while the Battle of Soledar was ongoing, Ukrainian engineers were actually going through and building these trench lines. So this is something that was pre-planned because of the deteriorating situation there in Soledar. You see just the massive amounts of trench networks. And you can see those communications trenches as they linking up with the road back there. You can see, the tertiary defensive lines and stuff. It's really impressive. Trench lines and their construction and their capabilities are immensely impressive as long as you know what they're talking or what you're looking at. The battlefields of World War I, trench lines are really, to an extent, pretty impervious. I dare say impervious, considering how many times we've seen breakthroughs there. But when done right, it minimizes casualties extensively, and it makes it very difficult. And you can see that hill, that downward slope, as you can see the overlooking of Soledar there. That's the factory there in the center of the city for the salt mine there, the Artem Seal. And you can see those massive amounts of trench lines that are overlooking that. So perfect fields of fire. You can see perfect positioning. I think those communications are a little bit long, but not necessarily a bad thing.
Александр. Сейчас він селфі на айфон зробить. Для лучшого ефекту зганяй поближе.
А мене і так не хуйово видно.
Та хуйово видно, там получше.
Повір. Совсем не хуйово.
Ух ти, блядь. Сейчас я наїбнуся, підверну ногу, блядь.
А воно вдалі, в є елеватор йобаний. Видно? Чого?
Камера хороша.
Видно, ніхуй делать. А там, блядь,
Камера може і побачить, він не побачив.
та я бачу. Даже ніхуй. Охуєнно видно.
Чуть-чуть.
А видно піздато. Ні, хата горить.
Там? Пошлите, станем там в деревах покурим.
На камері лучше видно, сука, чим я так бачу, йобана в рот. А ми їбошим. Хуйню нездорову. Особливо лоха воно, бля, як взявся, пізда нахуй.
So as I said, you can see there pretty amazing lines of sight. Bookham 40 says we get daily Russian casualty counts, but what about Ukraine? Got to be huge, also. Yeah, I actually as I've said several times in the past, one of the people that actually frequents the channel these days, I actually work with, and we talk very often, pretty much daily, about Ukraine and kind of the casualties. And unfortunately, he likes to take the side of he likes to play devil's advocate just to pick my brain, make me think, and probably to annoy me a little bit. But yeah, and I've explained this before here on the channel too. The thing is that yes, Ukraine, the Ministry of Defense releases the estimated casualty updates, but the thing is that it's questionable how accurate those are. When it comes to Ukraine, obviously, when it comes to this channel, while we try to remain unbiased and try to remain apolitical as best as we can, the issue is that we aren't we have a bias for Ukraine, obviously. But you have to remain skeptical if you want to be truthful about what's going on. You have to understand that there is an information war ongoing between Ukraine and Russia. Ukraine is trying to build support and is doing a really good job doing so. They're trying to build support in the international community. They're trying to build rapport. They're trying to show trustworthiness. They're trying to show success. They're trying to show that it is possible, not just for the international community, but for their own people. Because demoralizations, you lose the backing of your own people, you quickly lose conflicts. And you can see that in the Vietnam War. You can see that during the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. You can see where things just didn't go very well. The support either just kind of dissolved at home, or they were actively against it at home. And the support for the wars just kind of dried up. And that does not allow for those kind of campaigns to continue and to see really any battlefield successes, which is one of the reasons you don't really see a lot of battlefield successes, except at the very beginning when there's that nationalist fervor. Russia is trying to do the opposite in some ways. Russia is trying to undercut that narrative for Ukraine. They're trying to undercut the support. They're trying to do everything they can. And it's not working very well. And in many ways, it's very blatant in what they're trying to do. I'm sure there's a lot of stuff that's not so blatant. They do have quite a history of being actually fairly good at propaganda. But Ukraine, but these two sides are going to be going back and forth. And that doesn't necessarily mean everything is necessarily truthful about what comes out regarding both sides. Russia, it's a lot easier to pinpoint. There's so many facts out there. We can see the realities in a lot of ways, thanks to just this media, the media that everyone has a smartphone. So you can see the realities. You can see just from evidence that's already collected. It's out there. It's open. You can see it all of the time. It's all over the internet. It's all over social media. It's all over the news. You can see very much the reality of this war and what it looks like, especially when you look at German or Russian occupation in places like in Bucha and Irpin and Hostomel, things that are very, and when you see images from Mariupol, you see that, and it already disregards Russian media in a lot of ways. Tim Epps has a great example. 250% of the HIMARS we've sent reported destroyed. That's a good one. Yeah. So Ukraine, though, is going to do the same in some ways, and that is an inflation of some things, I think. Not definitely, I would say, much more trustworthy, but you have to understand that information is going on, and you have to be honest with yourself about those kinds of things. Even no matter where your backing lies, you have to be honest that there is propaganda on both sides. It's not a one-way street. There's inflation or deflation of casualties on both sides, or it's just not talked about in the case of Russia. And so from our point of view, we don't talk about immediate military casualties, or we don't talk about the wide-scale military casualties of the war here, just because, yeah, sure, the Ministry of Defense for Ukraine releases those numbers. It doesn't necessarily mean that those numbers are something that you should report. Fantastic. They killed 110,000 Russian troops at this point. I see it every day when I go through. Part of one of my sources, obviously. But is that accurate? And the likelihood is no. It's not. So that's the reality of the matter. Is I cannot find myself. I cannot be honest with myself and say I'm reporting facts by putting in casualty numbers, because it would immediately be incorrect. The actual casualties of this war, military, civilian, totals, doesn't matter. The realities of this war, the casualties inflicted, will not be truly known for years, if not decades, after the war is over. If we ever truly know. The conservative numbers for Soviet losses during the Second World War, because of super conservative numbers have it at 20 million. Accepted numbers have it at 27 million. And the very liberal numbers of deaths within the Soviet Union during World War II have it as high as 80 million. They simply don't know. So with a war like a scale of this, we can equally find that there's going to be some issues in trying to determine casualties, true casualty numbers. Delta Aviation 23 asked, can the United States track HIMARS? Yes. Not necessarily true as to like HIMARS being fired necessarily. There's certainly ways to track those. 100% there's a way to track those. I know that there is. Forte 10, a global hawk that likes to sit there right in international waters in the Black Sea, is probably doing exactly that. But so they can observe impacts, and they can also they can actually observe impacts, and they can actually observe like missiles and rockets and artillery rounds in flight at any given time, as long as the assets are there to do so. But military vehicles, while in transit, will actually have trackers on them, and so will a lot of really expensive equipment will have trackers on them. So it's definitely something to keep in mind. Is the government, while everything goes, there's always something that will go wrong in logistics. The government does actually have trackers on vehicles and stuff, so they will actually know. It doesn't necessarily mean that they aren't taken off once they arrive at their destination. It's more for an in-transit thing. But looking forward to ask, how much does the U.S. intelligence know about future Ukrainian operations? I'm sure a decent amount, but I'm sure that they're not allowed to say. Something to note about military intelligence: it's always wrong. It's always wrong. Doesn't matter. I've actually come across a lot of people who worked in intelligence who are now doing the OSINT thing, which I guess we rely to an extent on them. But we do vet our sources with other things too to make sure that it's true. But the thing is that I see a lot of people that work in intelligence previously, and they dedicate their time to doing OSINT. And I see very often, at least from my perspective, with my expertise, I see things that are most definitely wrong. With some of the things that with some of the stances that they're taking, and some of the things they're saying about some vehicles, is not correct. Which is fine. Intelligence is hard enough as is, to get the general idea, so I can understand technicalities. But if you're going to report something, at least do minimal amount of research on it. Kramatorsk was shelled. Once again, Kramatorsk was targeted with shelling. The Russian artillery attempted to cause damage to the de facto head of the government on the Ukrainian-controlled Donetsk Oblast. Kramatorsk was once again struck. It incurred no casualties. A private residence was damaged, along with several buildings within the industrial districts of the city. We can see some of that damage there. Obviously, that's the house. Looking 40 follows up. I don't think they are hand to hand, but get to peek at Ukraine's hand. They are, I would say, probably very much a hand in hand. We know for a fact that the Kharkiv counteroffensive was wargamed. That has been admitted to have been happening. They wargamed with the U.S. on the Kharkiv offensive months prior to it occurring. So very much hand in hand. We know that, and we know that they can see NATO. Can see everything that's happening thanks to ISR assets and intelligence assets that they have, or reconnaissance assets. I apologize. There's a difference between reconnaissance and intelligence assets that they have inside of this area. We're talking about sitting here in Romania or in the Black Sea or over here in Poland. or here in the Baltics, they know what's happening. They can see it in real time. They can report it in real time. They're very close. They're very close. They keep their cards very close to their chest when you're talking about, and very tight lip on it, because you don't want to know what the avenues are. You don't want to know quite the extent. I've seen people even suggest there's possibly special operations inside of Ukraine. I do not think so, because risk versus reward doesn't equal anything, and it doesn't change the grand scheme of things to use special operations forces inside of Ukraine for any particular reason. And we don't even really see contractors inside of Ukraine, which would be the obvious choice. Look at Blackwater, aka Academy, or Triple Canopy, or Vetrus, or any of those companies, which are American, that were used in Iraq, for instance. We don't really get to. We're not seeing that. We're not really seeing any special operations forces that I can really point to, or to be something that I could point to from my experience of working with them and say, yeah, that's a soft thing. That isn't already like their own guys that we know of. We got our latest daily Donetsk update from Pavel Kolenko, who says, quote, on January 24th, number of victims of Russian army in Donetsk Oblast increased by 10 injured, end quote. And we can see that here. He publishes this every single morning. This came out at 8 a.m. local time this morning. That would be 5 injured in Kostanivka, 2 in Toretsk, 1 in Velika Novosilka, 1 in Avdiivka, 1 in Krasnohorivka. So far, since February the 24th, 1,319 Ukrainian civilians have been killed and 2,889 have been injured within the Donetsk Oblast. And this does not include areas that are under occupation. So this does not include places such as Mariupol or Volnovaka or Donetsk itself, or any of those locations, just because there's no way to actually properly account. But Mariupol alone, as I have said before, based off of Maxar satellite analysis, we can see that there's tens of thousands of people that have been killed. Kostanivka, one of the places we just reported in that overall report, was one of the locations shelled. 4 people, and it looks like that was upgraded to 5 people, were injured after Russian shelling once again targeted the city of Kostanivka in the Donetsk Oblast. The rockets fired at the city, which lies about 11.5 miles behind the front lines right now. They were striking high-rise apartment buildings.
Я сидела тут в спальне, в телефоне, и так не поняла, что это. Оно как летит на меня, я вот пригнулась в этот самый, и давай выбираться, оно все полностью стеклопакет выпал, там выпало, а здесь 2 промушки как бы целые, это самое одно вот это выпало. А мы думали, что это подойдет стекло, не, оно узкое.
We do get some more photos of the damage there. Meanwhile, down here in Avdiivka, yet another settlement that we were talking about, Russian bombardment does continue there. Avdiivka actually had a small child who actually died of a heart attack after surviving the continual bombardments of the city, to tell you just how, to tell you the ferocity and the continuous amounts of bombardments. This time, of course, it was shelled with BM-21 Grad systems. These are multi-launch rocket systems. They fire 122 millimeter Katyushas, which are dumb-fired rockets that are not guided in any way, in about 40 round salvos. And we see that once again striking high-rise apartment buildings here as well. And from Pavel Kolenko, he said, quote, the city suffers from shelling every day and has already been virtually destroyed. Once again, you can obviously the destruction of those high-rise apartment complexes taking direct hits. Meanwhile, on the southern flank of the city of Donetsk, Russian assaults on Marinka do continue. Ukrainian troops defending what little remains of the Donetsk suburb of Marinka have faced continual assaults by Russian forces in the recent weeks, with significant increases in urban combat in a sector normally known for their intense bombardment and forces locked in a stalemate. Despite these incursions, Russian forces have yet to secure the suburb, which continues to provide pressure on the regional capital of Donetsk, allowing nearby artillery units to strike communications points, fabrication and repair facilities, ammunition depots, command centers, and targets of opportunity within the city of Donetsk with near impunity at this point.
Отак це Мар'їнки, це вуличні бої. Отак вам, сука, заробляється 100 тисяч, хто каже нахуй. Що це дуже просто. Це центр Мар'їнки. Самий центр. Будемо їбашити, підер. Таку, сука, церкву розібашили. І так ми працюємо. Підарів вибиваємо, що церкви так їбашать, до городу вже. Це був якийсь актовий зал.
And you can see the absolute just waste of whatever, I literally mean whatever is left of the city of Marinka. Because there just isn't anything left. I mean, it's been hit with TOS-1 thermal barrack munitions. It's been hit with grads. It's been hit with airstrikes. It's been hit with literally anything the Russians can throw at it, and they continue to throw at it that has been hit with it. Something interesting that Bookham 40 has brought up is Spetsnaz and VDV must be rebuilding over the winter. Be interesting on seeing how they will be deployed. And I have to disagree with that point. I do not believe that they are rebuilding. I think that they are just destroyed. The reality of the matter is that for Russia, pretty much anybody that is a combat capable unit has been deployed to Ukraine, or they're currently in the Southern Command, which has been stripped to bare bones. Southern Command being Syria, essentially. And the VDV in the Spetsnaz saw a lot of action very early on in the war. But just like the rest of the units that saw that at the very early on parts of the war, those units were annihilated. And when you're talking about mass conscriptions and stuff like that, these guys aren't getting a lot of training, if any training at all. It's one of the things we see them complaining the most about is a lack of equipment, a lack of training, lack of supplies, lack of anything, lack of good leadership. And so we know that these guys are getting sent to the front lines. They're not being groomed. You don't put whoever in VDV. VDV and Spetsnaz, which are a sect of the VDV. They're just the elite regiment of the VDV, essentially. They are basically supposed to be able to conduct these really sophisticated assaults. And we saw them try to do that unsuccessfully, but we saw them try to do that. And I will say at the very beginning of the war, in order to develop that chaos on the battlefield, I will say that it did, to an extent, cause quite a bit of panic and kind of craziness that really doesn't allow for Ukraine to shift their troops all the way to the north to meet the Russians head on. So the Wagner, so he brings up the Wagner group. Oh, don't get me started there. But what we're seeing is the VDV is pretty much annihilated at the beginning of the war, and you can see this from how they end up becoming used. The VDV go from conducting these air assaults on things like Hostomel Airport here, and they immediately now shift into, you see them being used as standard ground forces. What you see in Bucha are VDV forces. Those aren't standard ground forces. They're operating the BMDs. They're operating these lighter, purpose-built vehicles that are for the VDV. They're wearing the VDV undershirts. You're seeing those casualties are VDV forces, and you're seeing them being killed, and killing civilians in Bucha. That's what you're seeing there. And we know that those are also the same forces that took immense amount of casualties that forced their withdrawal, because these were then the same forces that were being launched at Kyiv. So the Russians have done very little. I will say they have probably done some, but very little to no rotation of forces. What we see is units are so destroyed. They are sent to the front line, and they are then so just absolutely destroyed that they essentially cease to exist. There's reports that the 7th Air Assault of the VDV was completely annihilated, and essentially no longer exists. We know that there are tank regiments that have been around since World War II and during World War II that no longer exist. That even the Russians, I had to admit, our entire unit has been annihilated. And that was early on when they were still giving us those kinds of things. But the VDV and the Spetsnaz, I would say the Spetsnaz probably has a little bit of a better chance. But at this point, most of your able-bodied men are now already fighting. I say combat capable, because the conscripts are more or less cannon fodder, but the troops that you actually have some kind of combat and kinetic capability with are already fighting in Ukraine. We already see the VDV no longer conducting their tasks as was intended, even by Russian doctrine. So you see them now turning into ground forces, which take significant casualties, because the VDV are truly a fragile infantry unit, or a fragile mechanized infantry unit, as opposed to the Russian standard ground forces, which at this point are no longer even deploying as battalion tactical groups, which is what they're supposed to be doing. So the whole Russian doctrine and model for conducting warfare went from being what you could expect of a modern military to literally just trying to tank the casualties and the losses wherever they can, World War II Soviet Russian style. Not really operating in a capacity that you would see the VDV or something like that really being capable. I mean, it's just, you're seeing air assault brigades and regiments just being annihilated. Really, you don't see the BMDs anymore. You really don't see the VDV at this point. And they're turning to conscription, which those guys are not going to be going into the VDV. It would have to be enlisted forces, to which there's not a whole lot left. So it really is a question on if it's capable. The Russians certainly are. I see them pointing out the Wagner group, and that they're using the Wagner group to tank some of those losses while they rebuild. I don't think that's true. Just because we know where other Russian forces are at. But what we're really seeing is the Wagner Group is spearheading the endeavor around Soledar and around Bakhmut. They're spearheading, but they are not the only detachments there. We do know that there are standard Russian forces here. They're just the biggest name in the area. And they have been the biggest name in the area for a while now. But Russian forces in general, the standard Russian ground forces, are around areas around Bilhorivka, Kremina, Svetove, up here into the north, where there's been little to no traction, and along this really nice long front line. While there are absolutely shattered units here are in reorganization down here in Kherson and Zaporizhia, where they continue to be struck with HIMARS batteries as they're trying to be reconstructed here because they were shattered when that whole Kherson counteroffensive was conducted. So Russia is definitely trying to take half-strength units and are trying to make one full-strength unit. But ultimately, at this point, we're seeing units literally being put into the front, and it's Warhammer 40k Imperial Guardsmen, essentially. Just you're there to soak up the enemy fire, and you're there until your unit is no longer existing, because we'll just stand another one up in your place. That's kind of the mentality we're seeing, and that's kind of what's leading to the horrific casualties. And like I said, any rotated units you're seeing going down here. This is Russian Operational Command South here in Syria. This is where you're seeing some segments of the Russian Air Force, some segments of the Russian military, the Russian army. You do still have really nice equipment considering, but they are now operating in a much more limited capacity than you saw just right before the war. I mean, these guys have been stripped of a lot of equipment. We've seen and shown here on the channel where their equipment is being used, where it gets prepped, it gets written up with invasion markings, and then is stripped from the command and sent into the war in Ukraine just because the casualty rates are so high. So it's just not a lot that they can do. So I see, I can understand, obviously there's some concern with it, but the VDV can't operate as the VDV now. That opportunity is over. It was over before it really started, and now we saw them abandon their doctrine, abandon their purpose, become ground forces, become annihilated as ground forces. And if they are stood back up, they are just going to once again be used as ground forces because the airspace is too contested to conduct air assaults. You do not have the supplies, equipment, and capability of conducting parachute jumps. Once again, the skies are still contested, and you're doing parachute jumps out of IL-76s, which are especially going to be susceptible to anti-aircraft fire and interception. So, if you think the BMP is really thin on armor, the BMD is definitely the BMP is an aluminum can. The BMD is it's like a toy. It's like a plastic toy when it comes to armor. And that's what the VDV use. Continue down here. Coming out of Melitopol. Detention and disappearances. Quote, as of January 25th, Russian occupiers have kidnapped and held in captivity more than 700 Ukrainian citizens in Melitopol in the Zaporizhia region. Dozens of Ukrainians have been in captivity for almost a year. That's coming from Ivan Fedorov, who is the mayor of Melitopol. And Odessa has some interesting news coming out today. It is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site for culture. The city center of Odessa, which has served as a settlement since the 6th century BCE, was established by the ancient Greeks. Evidence suggests the city was initially a trading settlement, but its storied history includes control by Genoa, the Crimean Khanate, the Ottoman Empire, and many more. At one point, the city served as a trading point for Lithuania, between Lithuania and Constantinople during the times of the Byzantine Empire. Coming from Amin Dzepar, who's the first deputy minister of the foreign affairs of Ukraine. President Zelensky also commenting on it. Andrei Azoulay, who is the Director General of UNESCO. Of course, also quoting the UNESCO themselves. This is now in the World Heritage List and also one of the World Heritage Sites in danger. UNESCO Kyiv. And this is what it looks like right now. Or what it has been looking like. It's monuments filled with sandbags. But that is all of the news coming out of the country of Ukraine over the last 48 hours. But that's not all the news to deal with Ukraine. And we can immediately jump over here to Germany to see why. And that's because the leopards are free. We did report the leopards were free earlier. That's because Poland was announcing that they were willing to give Ukraine the leopards, which is something that Ukraine had been pushing for. But at the end of the day, Germany got the say on if they could be re-exported, even though Poland was contemplating doing it anyway. But the leopards are officially free tonight, and that's because despite pledges from Poland and European nations, Germany debated for allowing that re-export of leopards. Growing international condemnation of Chancellor Scholz continued, even to the point of getting his own term Scholzing somebody. This especially grew after the United Kingdom pledged the Challenger 2. Today, Germany finally made the decision to not just to allow the re-export of those Leopard 2s, but has also decided to supply Ukraine with 14 Leopard 2A6 tanks. So, the Leopard 2A6, it is not the newest model of the Leopard, but it certainly is. It definitely is it is the second to newest variant of the Leopard, I should say. The Leopard 2A7 is the newest one that comes with upgraded survivability against tanks or against landmines and IEDs. But this is obviously Zelensky saying he's very grateful for that decision. Ministry of Foreign Affairs, of course, that leopard print. Everyone's gotta love that leopard print now. Dmytro Shmyhal, Prime Minister of Ukraine, of course, getting also that little leopard. And the official announcement, which we can see here, regarding the tanks, and it says. Chancellor Olaf Scholz announced in the cabinet on Wednesday that Germany will further increase military support for Ukraine. The German government has decided to provide Ukrainian armed forces with Leopard 2 battle tanks. This is the result of intensive consultations that have taken place with Germany's closest European and international partners. Quote, this decision follows our well-known line of supporting Ukraine to the best of our ability. We are acting closely coordinated internationally, said the Chancellor in Berlin. The goal is to quickly assemble 2 tank battalions of Leopard 2 tanks for Ukraine. In a first step, Germany will provide a company of 14 Leopard 2A6 tanks, which come from Bundeswehr stocks. Other European partners will hand over Leopard 2 tanks. The training of the Ukrainian occupations in Germany should begin quickly. In addition to training, the package will also include logistics, ammunition, and maintenance of the systems. Germany will grant the partner countries which want to act quickly deliver Leopard 2 tanks from their stocks to Ukraine the appropriate permits for transfer. So finally, we can get some closure on this. Ken Brown, asking, what percentage of Russian ICBMs do you think will blow up in their silos when launched? You know, it's half a joke, half not. While I do think about the only thing Russia has actually probably put any kind of money into is their nuclear arsenal, you got to see just how much of that has been funneled when you just look at the standard Russian army. You have to ask yourself, what this, like, seriously, what's the rest of the force look like? So I would say that I would say probably upwards of over 50 to 75% of their missiles are probably not in a condition to be launched or used. I feel like that's probably a safe estimate. Is anywhere from 50 to 75% are probably not capable of being used and or are in a state of disrepair, which would lead me to believe probably a fair amount. A lot of them are not in there. A lot of them are not in their silos or in units to be used right now, but I would say they're probably, the ones that are in there, I would say probably around 50%, I would say probably wouldn't properly launch. I don't think that a good 50% of them would probably launch because of maintenance issues. The only ones that you would see probably launch are their nuclear submarines and probably their mobile systems, less ICBMs, more mobile system launches for, I would say, more tactical nuclear weapons than strategic are probably more capable. Because with the intention of striking targets in, you know, the United Kingdom and France and Germany and Poland and stuff like that and local partners, while having a few capable of launching at the United States to send a signal, I think is probably the ideology there. Keep in mind, the Soviet Union did collapse because of military spending, essentially. And Afghanistan did not help. Italy will be contributing 1.5 million euros for a refugee camp. Italy has contributed 1.5 million euros to the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees, or UNRWA, support the emergency education for Palestinian refugee children and the Yarmouk camp in Syria. 14,000 refugees are lacking basic services. The fund would support the restoration of the severely damaged UNRWA school. And down here by Gibraltar, in the city of Algeciras in Spain, a machete-wielding man ended up attacking churchgoers. A man believed to be of North African descent used a machete in order to attack people visiting local churches there in Algeciras, Spain. While no numbers have been announced so far, it has been stated that there are both dead and wounded. The individual was detained at the scene, and the police have not ruled out the possibility of it being terrorism. See the machete?
Dios mío, la gente está loca. Ese hombre que va ahí lleva un hacha, la da a uno en la cabeza, que la deja allí tirado.
We jump down here and into the Middle East. We're over here by Israel. Juniper Oak 23.2 began. The U.S. Central Command and the Israeli Defense Forces officially kicked off the largest multilateral exercise in the history of their cooperation, involving over 6,400 troops, dozens of ships and aircraft, Both sides are look toward training to operate together in the often unstable and fluid situations which occur within the Middle Eastern region. Going from the United States Central Command. Israeli aircraft. HIMARS, always lovely to see. Both American and Israeli aircraft there. And there's more. Getting refueled there. And you see they have an entire aircraft carrier battle group there operating together. American and Israeli H-64 Apaches. This is coming from U.S. CENTCOM. Pretty sweet training exercise. Of course, I do not envy the guys that get to train in the nice hot desert sun. Actually, it's probably fairly cold there, to be fair. I mean, right off the Mediterranean, it's probably like a little warm, but it actually gets fairly cold in that region. Continuing on over here, this actually comes out of Malaysia here. Down there in Port Klang, hide and go seek ended up going horrifically wrong. A child from Bangladesh was playing hide and seek with his friends when he hid inside a cargo container. The container was sealed before he was found and then loaded on board an outbound vessel. He was found during inspections in Port Klang, Malaysia. Having no food or water during his 6-day voyage, he was rushed to a local medical center by authorities with severe dehydration.
Barangnya tu sana dalam tu barangnya. Ada barangnya. Tipe lagi kereta. Ada. Your name.
So, feel sorry for that kid. Hopefully he gets home nice and safe. Ken Brown asks, could we build a radar-like defense weapon that would fry and instrument systems of enemy planes? In theory, yes. In practicality, no. The reason being is most modern military aircraft, especially if you look at those produced by the NATO alliance, aka stuff built by the U.S., the F-16, the Mirage is going to be like this, the Typhoon, the F-15s, the F-22s, F-35s. Pretty much all American aircraft and major NATO domestically produced aircraft are going to be protected against things like EMP waves. And so similarly, their electronic suites are also going to be protected against other outside effects. So no, not really. Become 40. So 25% of the U.S. Marine Forces will be dedicated to anti-coastal defense. Agree? No. Not at all. I have no idea where you're getting that idea. No. The U.S. Marine Corps is not looking towards coastal defense. At all. The U.S. Marine Corps is looking at how to fight China across the South Pacific like it was World War II all over again. That's what the Marine Corps is doing right now. I got out right as the shift started between that. Because when I was in, it was the very end of what you can say is the proper global war on terror. I say the global war on terror is probably never going to end, but the proper, no kidding, it's, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, that stuff was still going on, and we were wrapping it up when I was in. Book of 40 says they are. I beg to differ. USMC 2030. God, it rhymes. Say hello to Force Design 2030. Oh, Jesus. Please give me Force Design 2030. Where's the annual report? Where's the actual report? The people... Okay, here you go. So, this is the Marine Corps 2030 design. Okay, they go through a whole bunch of paradigm shift BS that no one really cares about. Global War on Terror. You basically know what has led up to this point. Okay. So, combined arms, it's always going to be the Marine Corps thing. We figured that one out pretty quick. And you can see, so, canister launcher on a JLTV. That's kind of cool. Not really something I necessarily have ever cared about. So, a couple of things that were Force Design 2030 that you start to see being developed. Wasn't the actual Coast Guard engaged around 2004? I don't know too much about the Coasties, man. I never really paid attention to them. They don't even fall under the DoD despite being a branch in the military. They fall under Department of Homeland Security. So, you see a lot of things. They're worried about the Javelin. They're worried about Moz. They're worried about squad, binocular night vision, and stuff like that. You're seeing that they're going from... What you're looking at is you're looking at a lot of things with precision fires, which is what this whole top thing is about. This is what we want our precision fires to look like. We want organic precision fires capability using loitering munitions, basically taking the... Oh, shit, what is it called? Basically taking the hunter-killer drones, the kamikaze drones. Switchblades. Basically taking the switchblades, beefing them up, putting them on vehicles, and using loitering munitions for precision fires, similar to instead of having to have HIMARS batteries. HIMARS batteries can then be used to focus on anti-ship and anti-air engagements and very important strategic targets because they're going to be spread out across the Pacific. So that's kind of the whole ideology there. Organic precision fires, LATMAN packed. Once again, Switchblade drone, that's the whole point of it. Amphibious combat vehicle, already acquired. The JLTV, already acquired. The Razors, or they call them the MRZR, that's the Razors. Little Polaris, looking like you're on the farm kind of vehicles for off-roading. Those things are good. Coastal defense, what are they doing? No tanks, coastal defense. What are they doing? Yeah, so we got rid of all of our tanks because the Marine Corps said that they were too heavy. The reason for getting rid of tanks is because that in ship-to-shore operations, keep in mind I never really had to do amphibious operations, but in ship-to-shore operations and in the context of island-hopping campaigns, the slow, heavy, very logistically challenging aspect of tanks, while an effective tool in combat, the Marine Corps sees it that they are too heavy and too logistics heavy to support for a MAGTF to be able to conduct fast-paced operations amphibiously. Just too much for ship-to-shore. Ship-to-shore is already a very, very difficult task, and then tanks with the amount of supplies they require is just really heavy on that. I don't personally agree with that. I don't like having to rely on the Army for tanks. But they have other things that they're kind of worried about. What else do we got here? The M777s. They actually are decreasing the amount of 777 batteries they have. And they're increasing HIMARS. This system, they call it the MOS. It's the M3 Carl Gustav is what they're talking about. It's an 84mm recoilless rifle because why carry one-off rockets when you could have multi-purpose? The issue is that it's not very good for you to fire. Rockets alone are like rockets and missiles already in quick succession are not very good for you. The M3 Carl Gustav, the MOS, is also extremely bad for you. They're going to go with this. So it's meant for so they're switching the MVGs. We're still using PDS-14s. Oh, that makes me hate every single one of these guys. Oh, they're fielding 3 per company? That's BS. It says Javelin with lightweight command launch unit, or CLU is what I would call it. Man-portable shore launch anti-armor weapon system capable of attacking enemy tanks and structured targets via direct or top attack. LW CLU is needed to achieve extended maximum range provided by newer Javelin missiles. Yeah, okay, I knew about those. Fielding 3 per company. That's not good. 35% smaller, 32% lighter. That's also, I don't think, necessarily very good. Extends DRI from 2.5 to 4.5. That's pretty sweet. So the current FGM 148 Javelin system can fire at targets up to 2.5 kilometers away or 2,500 meters. They're talking right here of extending that to 4,500 meters. That's important because Javelins, the Javelin system, if it can hit something at 4,500 meters, it outranges any Eastern-made battle tank. Because all Eastern-made battle tanks right now have a maximum effective range of 4,000 meters. Meaning that the Javelin is no longer within their weapons envelope. They can no longer be engaged before you can engage. The M27IR. Whoop-a-doo-doo-doo. Yep, cool. We had those. Why does this guy have a holographic sight? You're going to use an RCO. That guy's just... Oh, that's because he's doing the whole fast thing. This guy's a recon marine. What is this? Suppressors, okay, I guess. Laser designator. This is a PVS. This is a. Oh God. This is a PEC 15. It's not even a PEC 16. It's PEC 15. 45 cal. Okay, 45 pistols. Yeah, okay. Dual night vision. The 31 alphas. Yeah, that'd be cool. I couldn't see shit. Lightweight plates, we already had that. High cut helmets. The Marine Corps just didn't want to afford them. We already have lightweight plates. Communication. Inter-squad radio, integrated helmet communications, and common handheld tablets. That sounds like an intelligence nightmare. Force design. Headquarters. So what are we adding? Oh, we're doing inherent logistical supports, essentially. I've looked at this before. I apologize if it seems like there's a lot of new stuff because they are continuing to update this. But I have read this before. I read it when it first came out. When we got the new Commandant. So, very interesting. But it has a lot of implications. There's a lot of stuff that just because the Marine Corps wants to do it or looks at it and says this is a great idea isn't necessarily meaning that that's what's going to happen. Okay, Book of 40 says, okay, so what to do with the Marines in 2030 seems like a desperate attempt to keep relevant. It's not a desperate attempt to keep relevant. So people keep saying, what's the point of the Marine Corps? That's the thing, right? What's the point of having the Marine Corps? You have the Army, you have the Navy, you have the Air Force. They all basically, and the Marine Corps just does all of their jobs. The point of the Marine Corps is not to fight the global war on terror like it's what it's actually done. Do Marines learn about actual seamanship in any way? I work with a guy on the trawlers who worked with the Royal Marines. Tim Epps says Navy always needs ground forces. So the Marine Corps has a purpose, and the Marine Corps' purpose is to be a strike force. That is the ideology behind it. To be a force that is capable of conducting amphibious operations and conducting an integrated capability all over the world. Royal Marines are different. Royal Marines are, but are not different. Royal Marine Commandos definitely are and are not different. We actually train a lot with the Royal Marines. I actually have met and made some pretty good friends with Royal Marines. We are different in some tasks. The United Kingdom uses the Royal Marines in much more of a special operations forces capability. The Marine Corps could be used in that capability as well, but are not. They're like, I don't know how to put this without dissing the Army too much, but the Army infantry are not. The Army infantry are there for quantity over quality. The Marine Corps infantry is over there for quality over quantity. Is basically how I would put it. They get all the fancy tools and stuff. They have the huge budget. They get all the fancy things. They dictate the ordnance and everything else. But at the end of the day, the Marine Corps' job is not to be the Army. The whole point of the Marine Corps for the United States is to be a strike force and an amphibious capable force. This means that, perfect example, was there is Baghdad, okay? Baghdad embassy is under attack. Who do you send? Do you send an entire brigade of the 82nd Airborne that needs to be flown in from the United States to Kuwait? No. You send a company of 100 guys to the Baghdad embassy complex that does that job, and when the 82nd's Advon finally arrives 3 days later, they see that the situation no longer requires the massive amount of troops that were sent there, and you can immediately leave, which is what the 82nd Airborne did. You have a MEU sitting here in the Mediterranean Sea that's sailing around, and all of a sudden you need to have I need an artillery battery in the middle of nowhere in Syria, and I need it now. That MEU immediately, that MAGTAF, MEU is a MAGTAF, Marine Expeditionary Unit, that MAGTF now can deploy infantry, artillery, whatever is needed, and inherently, just within its own little carrier force there, can immediately now put whatever you need on the ground, and that allows for troops to follow up later. So the Army and the Air Force and everyone else, the Marine Corps establishes that groundwork. They establish the perimeter, they establish what needs to be done right there in the moment, and they have all the tools that they need to do whatever job, whatever mission is required, and they can do it now. Respond anywhere in the world within 8 hours. Then that allows for the Army and the Marine Corps, the Army being an occupational force and not a strike force, the Army can come in and they can set up all the posts and bring in all the heavy equipment and engineers and everything else they need because the situation's stable for them to do so, and they can now surge forces into the area, relieve the Marines who can now go back to our boats, and then they can now take over the mission from there because they have the capabilities, the manpower, and the resources that the Marine Corps doesn't to do that larger mission set. So the mission can expand as needed, but the Marine Corps sets conditions for stuff like that to happen, and can also be done to provide additional support for special operations forces because the Marine Corps can do that. That's my entire purpose for going to Syria was they didn't want the Army there. They needed guys that were experts in their specific field, and had a lot of experience in those specific things, and to go into that certain area. So that's the whole purpose of the Marine Corps, is a strike force anywhere in the world within 8 hours to provide immediate support and suppression on any target, and to provide amphibious capabilities in order to conduct large-scale amphibious operations anywhere in the globe. There were Marines on D-Day, in case you didn't know. There were Marines on D-Day. Not ground troops per se, but landing logistics specialists, also known as the Red Tabbers, who were the ones who guided in landing craft onto the beach. Book of 40 says that goes back to the airborne or Marine argument, which is better. Different jobs. I have a lot of respect for the airborne. Or I have a lot of respect for the airborne when they do actual airborne things, not the airborne I went there to get my tab and go to jump school. Because the airborne infantry, if you actually do your, if you look historically at what the airborne does, the 173rd Airborne Brigade there in Vietnam, you look at, any of the airborne brigades in Vietnam, you look at them in Korea, you look at them in Europe during World War II, then their job is very difficult, and they can do a lot of things, and they're used to being cut off. They train to be cut off and to not have support. But if you look at what their purpose was coming up with the airborne doctrine, it's not to set conditions for a larger operation. It's to cause havoc behind enemy lines to make those conditions easier. The conditions for landing at Normandy was not the Marine Corps going in here because we're jumping from island to island and just absolutely going through a bloody endeavor that I think would make anyone in Europe shudder. But the conditions for here were bombardment of the coast, making sure that they thought that we were going to land up there in Calais, and to make sure that, Book of 40 says the airborne is not self-sufficient. You look at the VDV, the Russian airborne. They did an airborne doctrine in Ukraine, landed at Hostomel Airport, and what happens? Gets annihilated because because the rest of them can't, because the ground forces didn't get up to them fast enough. Definitely, I think that's also really poor planning because that was an exceptionally deep airborne drop, but still, that mentality of what the airborne's supposed to do, the airborne can't operate without ground forces backing them up in a relatively short manner. They will not last for long. Just can't do it. And it's not just this instance. Look at Operation Market Garden. You see the same issue. Dropped way too deep with too little support, with too many things that could go wrong, too far from where their intended objectives were. and it goes horrifically wrong, and they're essentially wiped out before the British ground forces could get up to them. So, D-Day, I wouldn't say is a textbook example of what airborne operations are meant to do, but it gives a really good picture. Cause havoc behind the enemy lines, not too far though, so that way everyone else can get caught up with them. Whereas Operation Market Garden and air assaults on Hostomel Airport show really, really bad, exactly how bad things can go. And, you know, this is what happens with the air, when they don't get support fast enough. Whereas the Marine Corps doesn't really need it. I was told I was going to be the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad for 72 hours before I would get relieved. I was there a month and a half. The guys that were in Syria were expecting to be relieved relatively quickly. Their missions just kept getting extended and extended and extended and extended and extended. So, the Marine Corps doesn't need to get support right away. They're there to lay the foundation, but that foundation will last however long it takes to get that support in there. The airborne can't, but that's not really their job. So it's not really... I have major respect for both. I really don't. The airborne's hard. Being in the military is hard. I mean, everyone, your job is incredibly, incredibly hard. Jumping over here into Africa, getting back to the news here. An Su-25 was hit with manpads. An Su-25 Frogfoot, which is a Russian ground support aircraft, was struck by a man-portable anti-aircraft missile. Reports indicate that it may have been fired by the Rwandan military, as both countries are on rocky diplomatic footing. The aircraft was supporting ground forces carrying out strikes on the M23 rebel group. Its pilot was able to land the aircraft.
Van a tirer à Cobra. Hey, hey, vite!
And you can see that as it has landed. Obviously, things not going very well, considering there's jet fuel burning, but... And then the Rwandan government said Democratic Republic of the Congo fighter jet violates Rwandan airspace. And today at 5:03 p.m., a Sukhoi 25 from the Democratic Republic of the Congo violated Rwandan airspace for the third time. Defensive measures were taken. Rwanda asked the Democratic Republic of the Congo to stop this aggression. So taking responsibility for the attack as the Rwandan government. Not but a couple, or about 37 miles east of Tripoli, a boat carrying 150 migrants capsized. A boat carrying at least 150 migrants capsized off the coast of Garibaldi, Libya, on Tuesday. 8 died and 58 were still missing. 84 reportedly survived and were taken to government-run detention centers for migrants. If you want to have more information, newarab.com has an entire article on it. Meanwhile, we have a couple of updates coming from the United States, and the one that everyone is interested in is the fact that the United States is going to be delivering 31 M1 Abrams tanks to Ukraine. The U.S. President announced that the U.S. would deliver 31 Abrams tanks to Ukraine, along with 120mm rounds and other munitions, equipment, and the parts needed for maintenance. The tanks would be procured through the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative, or USAI. Training Ukrainian forces on the logistics and maintenance of the tanks will likely embark in the coming weeks, as the delivery of tanks would take time. This is because through USAI, these tanks will not be coming from the current stockpile of American armor forces. No, these tanks are going to be built specifically for the Ukrainians. So General Dynamics will be firing up the assembly line and cranking out some new M1 Abrams tanks for Ukraine to be sent to them. And for the President of the United States. Coming from the Department of Defense, who came out with an article on this. This one was written by David Vergun, who's from DoD News. Furthermore, that news release, Biden administration stating it's going to be worth $400 million in the USAI package. It will include 31 Abrams tanks with 120 millimeter rounds and other munitions. That's because there's multiple weapon systems and defensive measures on an Abrams. 8 tactical vehicles to recover equipment. These will be the brand new Abrams recovery vehicles, which will also be built by General Dynamics. Support vehicles and equipment, fuel vehicles, ammunition vehicles, repair vehicles, everything else you need for that, and funding for training, maintenance, and sustainment. So all the spare parts and everything, and of course the training needed. Alongside the Abrams tank provided by the United States, European Consortium is committing to provide 2 battalions of Leopard tanks to Ukraine in the near term. The United States will continue to work with our allies and partners to meet Ukraine's battlefield needs and to counter Russian aggression. In total, the United States has committed more than $27.8 billion in security assistance to Ukraine since the beginning of the Biden administration. Since 2014, the United States has committed more than $29.9 billion, with 27.1 of that being since the beginning of the war on February the 24th. And of course, the announcement was, of course, greeted very welcomely by President Zelensky, who, by the way, happy birthday to President Zelensky. It is his birthday today, and I'm sure he's getting lots of wonderful birthday wishes there. And Denise Schmeihal here as well. Looking forward to, in my opinion, a Marine Recon Platoon would have done as well as Delta Force on the Bin Laden raid. It's a waste of high-quality manpower to use soft. It wasn't Delta Force who conducted the Bin Laden raid. It was a SEAL Team 6, and I don't agree. I have friends that are Recon Marines. I do not know if they are still in. I haven't talked to them in a long time. I haven't talked to them since I got out, but I went to boot camp with them. And Recon School is actually in the same part as the standard School of Infantry, at least for West Coast. And I do not agree. Recon Marines can definitely go through a lot of crap. Don't get me wrong. That is... Nope. I watched them boys suffer. I listened to those stories and watched those boys suffer on their rucks. I will never talk crap about a Recon Marine. Those guys can really do... Those guys can go through some crap to get where they are. But SEAL Team 6 was deployed at exactly its purpose. I mean, on that raid. It was exactly what it needed to do. It was exactly their purpose. And I do not think that would have been executed nearly as well, especially when you consider the downing of the aircraft and the contingencies required around that. I think that was... And then the TSE, Tactical Site Exploitation, once they killed Bin Laden and that limited time that they had to get everything that they could out of that building. It's not the only thing coming from Washington, D.C. The USA House has approved a resolution in support of the Iranian people. The House overwhelmingly approved Resolution HCON Res 7 at 420 to 1 that expressed solidarity with the Iranian people who stood up against the regime. Quote, the resolution commends the bravery, courage, and resolve of the women and men of Iran who are, 1, participating in the current protests to defend their fundamental human rights, and 2, risking their safety to speaking out against the human rights abuses committed by the Iranian regime. The resolution condemns 1. The brutal beating and death of Mahsa Amini, and 2. The violent suppression of the Iranian regime of women and men participating in the current demonstrations, including children, and the calls for transparent accountability for all killings of protesters by Iranian security forces. And here is that actual bill for you guys. The PBS also has an entire thing on there. I have a feeling that person who is the one may not be reelected. USAID is going to be providing $56.5 million in urgent aid to Haiti. The USAID announced on Tuesday to provide $56.5 million in urgent aid to Haiti. The aid will provide 868.8 thousand Haitian people with food, medical supplies, medicines, safer water access, and operations to bolster health facility operations. And this is coming from their official press center. Specifically, that medical supplies will be going, a lot of it will be going in order to fight cholera, which has a huge epidemic going on in Haiti right now, to unclean water. They'll also be providing $75 million in humanitarian aid to the Rohingya refugees. USAID is providing $75 million in aid to the Rohingya refugees in the Cox's Bazar of the Bangladeshi host community. USAID will collaborate with the World Food Program to provide critically needed new food and nutrition assistance, infrastructure maintenance, disaster risk reduction, and logistics support. Once again, coming from their office. They will provide an assistance to roughly 600,000 people. And so that is everything ongoing there, at least around the world from our sources for tonight. Quite a bit of stuff. Obviously, we had some very much off-topic discussions for a little while. Not that I mind. I do like having those interesting discussions, mostly because, well, I find the topics interesting myself, and I got a lot of, I like to think, at least reasonable opinions on them. But with that, I hope that you guys have enjoyed. I'm happy to see the leopards are free finally. It's properly freed. And I'm happy to see that Ukraine's getting a lot of support. And I thank everyone for joining us tonight. It's been fantastic to have you all. And I hope that you guys are able to provide a bunch of awesome support to those organizations in the description below. And I hope that you guys will be coming back here and joining us once again on Friday nights at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, 9 p.m. Central, for another 24 hours of news, or another 48 hours of news and review. In the meantime, my name is Paul from the New News. Have a fantastic night. I hope that you and your family and your friends remain safe. And if not, I do hope that you find that safety and security in the very near future. See you guys Friday. All right, bye now.
Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стоять до повноваги, і чудно кличе діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО. Нам не треба ні конфлікту, ні війни. Та ми готові всіх вас звать до сатани. Тисячі вже полягло, і все більше шлейфуємо. То для них нема нічого, крім труни. Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з звішаємо з багном. І стріляє до волновах, і чудно кличе, ідіть нахуй, тут працює ЗСУ і ТРО. Gone home, Russian soldiers, gone home. Бо ми всіх вас тут звішаємо з багном. І стріляє до волновах, і чудно кличе, ідіть нахуй, тут працює ЗСУ і ТРО. Gone home, Russian soldiers, gone home. Бо ми всіх вас тут звішаємо з багном. І стріляє до волновах, і чудно кличе, ідіть нахуй, тут працює ЗСУ і ТРО. Gone home, Russian soldiers, gone home. Бо ми всіх вас тут звішаємо з багном. І стріляє до волновах, і чудно кличе, ідіть нахуй, тут працює ЗСУ і ТРО. Ідіть нахуй.